everybody, Joel here from cosinesound.com.au. Thanks for joining me again today. Well, I'm very glad to be making another video. It's been a little while once again, but in this video I'm going to run through some key settings when analyzing audio by using spectrograms, especially FFT. Many of these settings you may see in other analysis programs. I'll be using my current version of iZotope RX6 Advanced, which, as iZotope have established, are one of the most favored spectrum analysis tools due to its ability to repair audio. What you just saw, by the way, in the beginning was the 2D one, which is another type, but we'll get into that soon. So to start with, the settings that we have can be accessed by right-clicking. We go to Spectrogram Settings or press Shift Command comma, and these settings are incredibly flexible. So we've got regular STFT there. It's one of the fastest settings available, the least CPU demanding, and the limit is that it pretty much only calculates the spectrum in one go, and it doesn't really adjust any of the settings. It's pretty much just one graph, and you basically zoom in on the graph however you like. So yeah, uniform setting for time and frequency. The next one is, if I just double click here, it should reset that timeline to zoom out. The next one is auto adjustable. So this one is going to adjust the FFT size. As you can see, it's grayed out now because that will now adjust depending on the zoom level that I have. So if I go to the bottom timeline and scroll, you'll see that the setting does change at some points. There we go. So the FFT Windows changed to give different levels of detail. It might be more obvious with the drums and strings track I have here, so I'll just play this. So if we zoom in vertically, we can see those string notes become more refined at certain points. There we go, it's just refreshed the resolution again. And now this scale that we're looking at is approximately 1.4K all the way up to, say, just over 2.5K there. So this actually requires different fast Fourier transform sizes, as we'll get into. And that means that we can see different levels of detail, basically. It's a pretty handy setting. Multi-resolution is a little similar, but it's going to graph the lower frequencies differently from the high frequencies, which is... it's a unique type of setting that has that mirrors our ear's perceptions, basically, because typically low frequencies are not always clear, while high frequencies tend to stand out. So if we just jump back to the regular STFT setting, watch what happens to the low frequencies. You'll see they become blurry. So what we can do is also demonstrate this by changing the scale to extended log, which basically focuses the frequency scale on the low frequencies. So now the bottom range of frequencies, let's say below 1K, have now taken up about half the graph. But it's very vague, basically, what frequencies are showing up here. If we change to multi-resolution, it should become a lot clearer. And you can see that mostly the second half is now optimized. The final setting is the one that I prefer the most, which is the most CPU demanding, but basically it's optimizing the graph for the most detail in all viewing modes. And in this case, the settings are all flexible as well, so I can adjust the settings. And that's really what this video is going to be about, is going through these settings. Now, what does FFT stand for exactly? It actually stands for fast Fourier transform, which is an algorithm that determines the frequencies in a signal over a given time period. Usually when you see the FFT label, it means that there is information about the sound's frequency content. So there's a great video series by 3 Blue 1 Brown that I'll link to in the video description. And this dives a lot deeper into how it all works. Working with digital audio, the FFT window is represented by the number of samples in the sample window, let's say 1024. That's what we have here. It's pretty standard window size, and its usefulness depends on the sample rate, but also the types of sounds that are analyzed. Now, we pretty much demonstrated in the multi-resolution setting that different FFT sizes will be more suitable for actually different frequencies. At a glance, basically smaller sizes are suitable for more transient sounds, and larger sizes are suitable for more detail in frequency precision. You could say that the smaller ones are more time precise, and the larger FFT windows are more frequency precise. That means that if we want to look at these string sounds a bit clearer, we could increase the FFT size, but what we'll find is that the percussive sounds become more blurry, and the percussive sounds are the transients that time dependent. So at around 4,000 and up, it becomes pretty apparent that where the string frequencies lie in priority over where the frequencies of the transients are. So it turns out that FFT, or time frequency analysis, has a limit of accuracy where either frequency is uncertain over time or time is uncertain over frequency. So this is called the Gabor limit, named after Dennis Gabor, the Hungarian-British electrical engineer. And it's actually known to be analogous to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in quantum physics with wave-particle duality. Really amazing, because you realize how much of an impact this has on our analysis of real-world phenomena. In iZotope RX, we can really benefit further from cross-checking the audio waveform as well for more precise time measurements, otherwise unclear in the spectrum. So that's the benefit of the waveform, is knowing precisely where the transients are hitting. As you can see, if we look at the high FFT window size, the transient of this snare drum is somewhat blurry and inaccurate, but at least we get an idea of what the frequency range is. Now, if I again go back and lower the FFT window, let's say 128, now becomes a lot clearer where the transients are hitting. But on the downside, again, the lower frequencies and the string frequencies are now pretty much invisible. And even if I change the scale back to, let's say, Mel, for a more better representation, you can still can't really make out what the string frequencies are. If I change to linear, we're going to look at only the high frequencies. 500 Hertz is at the very bottom, but 1K is pretty much the central sensitive frequency that we're used to perceiving with our ears. But you can see how washed out the graph becomes when you use small windows. So let's change it back to 2000. Now the noisy aspect of the snare drum and the tom hits have become clearer. And we could zoom back in on the strings by going back to the better scale for the strings. So let's try Mel. So there we go. We can see the individual string notes now. This is good for zooming in quite far, but let's refine it a little bit more. Now, another setting that is very handy is changing the dynamic range of the graph, and that is shown here by amplitude range low and high decibel readings. We can change these sliders, or we can also scroll on the color bar here. So what I'm doing is reducing the dynamic range of the graph. Pretty much about 34 dB is the maximum now, and anything below 80 is basically invisible to the eye. So this bar becomes handy for narrowing down what amplitudes we want visible. Now we can see the frequency, now we can see the string frequencies a lot clearer. You can also see where the energy of the kick drums are coming in. We can see where the peak, basically where the most energy in the sound is. Let's go further down to, say, logarithmic level. And we can also add a piano roll here. So if I go to right click on the scale, go to piano roll, show piano roll. Now we can see where these string notes are hitting. And if I scroll on the scale, the larger FFT size quite elaborately draws those notes in. So I'm holding down, looks like a D major chord there. So we got D, F sharp, and G, and I can just select that. And what I can do now is actually graph the selection onto the 2D spectrum. And there's our confirmation there. So we've got peaks at 293 Hertz or D4, F sharp, and then A again. Did I say A? I think I did. And that should sound like a major chord. Great. Another thing we can do is just play that selection by using the time frequency selection tool. So that's just playing those 3 single frequencies, which are in that stringed instrument. Alright, let's jump back to some other settings. To really get an idea of how the FFT window is constructed, we can jump back to regular settings, take down the overlaps, take out the high quality rendering, and let's actually go back to the original drum track. Alright, so this is pretty much the lowest quality, and if we zoom in, the FFT size is 1024, and if we just select that, it should be the size of that window. Yes, by the way, there's a scale at the bottom that can be changed, so we can change that to samples. Now, the selection I have, I can change that to 1024, and you'll see that that is the window that we're looking at. So that's the exact size, 1024. Now, what is the duration of that sound? We can quickly switch back. Whoops. So we can quickly switch back to time setting to see how long that is, and that's 23 milliseconds of data there. So 23 milliseconds with the sample rate of 44.1K, which is going to give us 22K of resolution. So that's about, 23 milliseconds. It's pretty short. So how do we use the padding? Basically, the padding is a way of repeating the FFT size. If we go to time overlap and select 2 times, we'll see it duplicate. Basically, the time overlap is going to multiply the FFT window, sort of like increasing the number of megapixels. What further increases the detail is adaptively sparse. It's almost like doubling the total information. Another one is the frequency overlap, which is a lot more subtle, but I tend to just leave it at 8 times. And then high quality rendering is a way of smoothing out the pixelation. So generally speaking, I don't find these very useful apart from saving CPU power. But it's basically a way to increase the rendering resolution. So now how about we zoom out now and then go back to, let's go back to one of the kick drum sounds. We'll zoom in on the kick drum sound to see where the frequency is going. Okay, so we've got a few kick drum hits there. Let's change the FFT size to increase the frequency resolution. And what scale? We're on extended log. We can zoom in a bit more as well. Move the scale up. We're getting the graph is a bit blown out at the moment, so we can zoom out on the amplitude. Really cool setting is enable reassignment, which is another CPU intensive setting, which apparently is also benefited by the overlap settings. Basically, it highlights micro tuning. So basically, enable reassignment, it allows for, it basically reveals pitch contours because it's very precise. So yeah, what it shows us is that the pitch the fundamental pitch of the kick drum is actually dropping down, which is a lot of music producers will be aware of the fact that kick drums drop in their pitch as they are resonating, and we can really see it dropping. If we look at the bottom right hand side of the screen, it's dropping from 60 hertz down to 25 hertz and then fading at around 25 hertz. So a more advanced setting is the window. Basically, the FFT window has a certain bias towards how it's calculated. I find Blackman to be the most easiest to use and work with. Let's try Han. It's basically the FFT window has a certain shape to it, which is like a mathematical bias. I'm not really sure how it works, but I find that Blackman is pretty good. There's also different color map settings. I really like green, cyan to orange, but there's also other ones like multicolor. You want to get very precise color measurements, but there's also iris 2. I really like cyan to orange because at least it has two colors as well as just basically has a high and a low color. And it also has black and white mixed in. Okay, so let's jump over to the black Tern because there was something I was really dying to check out. So as we looked at in the previous video on bird synthesis, this might not look very familiar anymore, but let me just adjust the settings. So there's linear, 1024, there we go. All right, so we wanted to look at the tail end of these tails, or the tail end of these curves. Let's go to 128, and now the frequency starts to blur, so let's go 256, and then we go adaptively sparse. Let's zoom in a bit more. Okay, let's zoom in on the amplitude. It almost looks like the harmonics are bunching together. But we can see that there might be actually two separate tweets happening. I think I alluded to that before. Might be able to enable reassignment. There we go. How about that? So it looks like there's actually one there. That's really, really minute, but this one is also minute. This is 15 milliseconds with a gap. There's actually a gap after that. What do you get? What do we get from this? Well, there's a really rapid tweet there. It's about 15 milliseconds. And then the one we synthesized actually starts there. It's about 80, 90 milliseconds. And it's possible that there's one more after that. Because the amplitude drops here. The amplitude drops down and then there's one at the end. So let's listen to that. It sounds like there's like another tweet at the end. There's like an accent. And there's an accent at the beginning. Now that's really how you're going to find out, is by really applying the settings that I just went over there. Interestingly, the the tweet in the beginning appears to be going up and down back to the normal level. So it's like jumping up and down in the space of 15 milliseconds, and then we've got this lengthy tweet there with a pitch drop at the end. It's really quite extraordinary. I really wouldn't be able to pick this out by listening to it, but what I can do now is attempt to synthesize it by taking that into account. The 2D spectrum here is based on the position of the locator, as we illustrated before. If we place the locator right in the middle of that sound, it shows a little bit of movement. It's almost like it's moving up in pitch because it's sort of dragging across. Now that's because the FFT size is quite large there, so we can take that down, and now these become sharper. Let's take it down another size, and now these frequencies are very distinct. They're very, you might say, certain of what these frequencies are. And that is due to the window around that playhead is being 1024. Again, we've also got the time overlap, which is playing a role there and doesn't really affect it too much. But also we can make a selection, and that'll factor that into the FFT size, and then output a graph. But I think the playhead is a really beneficial way to use this. We have to remember that the FFT size is actually a function of time, so this is actually representing a period over time. It's not an instantaneous, there isn't really such thing as an instantaneous sound because it has to travel over a time period. And what is the fastest time period? It's like 512 samples. What also happens is that instead of looking at the timeline graph, now we look at a decay amount. So we'll look at how fast the peaks are dropping. And in this case, the peaks are dropping at about 80 dBs per second. There's another way to have a look at this. So 120. And infinite averaging means that it's just going to pretty much average the spectrum out until I press stop. So instant is just based on the FFT size, and it's not going to average. Really, it's pretty incredible stuff. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you find it helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and yeah, there'll be more videos coming up soon. Thanks for watching.